Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining us today. Now we would like to begin the keynote session 2. First of all, I would like to introduce the moderator for this session. Mr. Tanaka Nobuo, the chair of ICEF Steering Committee, former executive director, International Energy Agency, and CEO of Tanaka Global Incorporated. So now I would like to ask Mr. Tanaka to moderate this session. Mr. Tanaka, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Now we are moving to the keynote session number 2. Here we have Ambassador Pake just in time, so beautiful. Ambassador is always diplomatic and very good in time, so. Let me introduce our panelists today. Ambassador Pake from the European Union and Hel Christophersen. She is the president of Asia and member of the executive committee of Total Energies. And also the panelist is Keisuke Sadamori. He is a director of energy market and security of the International Energy Agency, IEA. We will, this session is talking about energy transition, but what we are facing now is a real serious global energy crisis. After Russian invasion to Ukraine, oil price, gas price, coal price, electricity price, every price is really skyrocketing, and energy security is a #1 issue for almost all governments. And now the things is getting very messy in Gaza and Middle East, Iranian intervention, Israel attack. So the oil prices is moving up substantially. So this energy security and emergency is the real thing. So I fully understand what Johan Rockström mentioned about the emergency or urgency of the climate change or planetary boundaries. But without energy, we cannot continue our industrial activities or consumption or life for the human being. So how this geopolitical issues and energy security could be compromised or should be treated in a balanced manner with climate emergency is a really challenging question. So first, ladies first, I want to ask Helen about this current energy security situation and how Total Energy is going to respond. Because I tried to get Abdullah bin Al-Attiyah, the Qatar's former oil minister. He's a very good friend of mine, and he committed to come, but unfortunately his sickness, he cannot come at the last moment. So Qatar is playing a very important role for energy security in terms of providing the huge resources of gas for Japan. Not now, but certainly a very important player. So I just try to ask him the question of this geopolitical situation in the Middle East. But unfortunately, this doesn't happen. But Helen, I think Total Energies is one of the most, well-prepared company for the energy security and betting many plants and investment into the different area of the world. So how do you see the current security situation of the energy market?
Thank you very much for the introduction, Tanaka-san. I do apologize. You have to bear with me since Al-Attiyah could not come. So my apologies. Also, we heard this morning the importance of staying within the planetary boundaries and how that must have a consequence on the rules and incentives for companies. And I'm just take this opportunity to share with you that in our company, we use a $100 carbon tax. And we have actually been advocating in favor of carbon taxes since June 2015, even before the COP in Paris. But every time we invest, when we invest in fossil fuel, there is a punishment, there's a penalty in the business case. And of course, within the company, the projects they compete for money. And so the fossil fuel projects we have, they are at a disadvantage versus all the clean energy projects that we have. Just to make the link with this morning. But a few words maybe on the total energies, and to your point on energy security. We were created exactly 100 years ago for energy security reasons after World War I. And very few people know that effectively Total was created by confiscating oil assets from Germany after the war in Iraq. And back then, in the 20s, the Prime Minister of France said, it's an ugly thing, he said that actually oil was as important as blood to win a war. Hence, the establishment of the company that has today become Total Energies. So we thrived as an oil company. Over time, we added gas to our portfolio. We're very big in LNG in particular. And then, since 2016, we have also diversified the portfolio into electricity, renewables, and low-carbon molecules, biogas, biofuels, sustainable aviation fuels, early-stage hydrogen, and we also invest in carbon capture and storage. We want to play a leading role in the energy transition, and at our little scale, we will be doing what was called for in the COP, which was multiply by 3 renewable energy production between now and 2030. We're at 33 terawatt hours of production, and we are targeting 100 or 110 or 30 or 20 in 2030. So we will be tripling renewable energy production at our little stage. What we have seen, of course, is that energy security is still a top priority everywhere in the world, and if some richer countries had forgotten the importance of energy security, as you said, certainly the crisis in Ukraine with the spike in prices was a very serious wake-up call for all the countries. We got requests from European countries, from the UK, from Norway, from Denmark, from the Netherlands, and from the EU Commission back in 2022 to continue and maximize as much gas production as we could. And all these countries, of course, have a net zero strategy to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. The reason for that is that energy security is not just about availability of energy, but also the price. Because energy affordability is key for citizens, not just in the global south, but even in the Western world. And it's important for governments because they want to be re-elected. And then, of course, affordable energy is key for industrial competitiveness. So it's really key. Energy security has the 2 aspects, availability and price. But as you just said, what's important today is that we reconcile the focus on energy security with the energy transition. And that is not as simple as it sounds. We cannot oppose energy security and energy transition. We have to make them work together. So you asked me off stage if the crisis in Ukraine had caused us to change our strategy, and the short answer is no. We know that a successful energy transition means building a new energy system with as little fossil fuel in it as we can. And this compares to today's system that has around 80% of fossil fuel in it. We have to do it as fast as possible. We cannot unplug the existing system until the new one is ready. And the bad news, of course, is that the new one is not entirely ready. What we can do and what we are trying to do is to maximize and speed up the build-out of a lower carbon energy system. So our strategy is essentially trying to address these 2 sides of the same coin, continue to provide the energy the world needs today. In our case, it's a lot of oil and gas, and use the money from those activities to accelerate the deployment of cleaner energies into the energy system. And we invest roughly $17, $18 billion per year, and the split is pretty simple. It's 1/3 on maintaining existing oil and gas fields, because you know that they deplete by 5% every year. So a flat supply means reinvesting. The second third is to sanction new projects, but very strict criteria, as I said, including carbon tax, because demand is still growing. And if the supply isn't there, prices will go up. And the last third is clean energies. So a lot of renewables, solar and wind, but as I said, also low carbon molecules and CCS. We have an R&D budget of 1 billion, which is dedicated by 3/4, 75% to energy efficiency, new energies, CCS, and environmental research and negative carbon technologies. So very much in line with what we heard this morning, it's not just about energy, it's about the biosphere. But then did the crisis in Ukraine impact us if it didn't change our strategy? Were we impacted? And the short answer is yes. First of all, because Europe became an LNG buyer, because there was no longer any Russian piped gas, which was a demand shock of 25% more demand in a few months in the LNG market, so it pushed up prices. Japan knows it very well. So that was a positive impact when you're an LNG seller. But the negative impact, of course, was that we had operations in Russia and we had to shut everything and we had to write down a lot of assets. So we were both, benefited, if you can say so, on one side, and we certainly had a lot of negatives on the other side. Which leads me to the question about how do we as a company manage the geopolitical risk and how do we things going forward in terms of are the geopolitical current crises, are they helping or an impediment, an obstacle to the energy transition? A lot of people will tell you that geopolitics actually play against the transition. Think about trade barriers, think about tariffs, think about, countries and players that are under sanctions. But so how do we manage? We manage through geographical diversity. We manage through investing in many different countries at the same time. We prefer global markets, so LNG very much better than piped gas. We need to have a strong balance sheet. We do a lot of crisis preparation, including cyber attack preparation. And of course, we need partners. And I will close with that. We think partners are very important to manage geopolitical risk, local partners, so that we can, use them when there is a crisis. Partnership is also key for the energy transition. And partnership is key for innovation. We can talk about that later, if you wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Hel. Very good expression about Total's security strategies. Diversity, yes, that's the answer. You said that, I remember that Total invested in the Yamal project in Russia. You shut down it, or you are still continuing importing LNG from Russia, no?
So it's a good question. There are sanctions on Russian gas, and I'm sure that the ambassador can also comment on this. But there are not sanctions on Russian LNG in Europe because Europe understands that the LNG is needed until maybe the end of the decade, maybe a little earlier. And we, as a company, have contracts in force to buy the LNG and to ship the LNG. So we cannot get out of these legally binding agreements. We've discussed it at the board level of the company until and unless there is a force majeure event, which would be sanctions. So Yamal is still operating in Russia, and therefore we're not operating the project, it's a Novatec, but we are still honoring our legal contracts because there's no way out for us until there are sanctions coming.
Thank you very much. It's same as Japan buying some of the Sakhalin LNG. Let's move to Ambassador Paquet. We started about this energy security under the geopolitical turmoil. What is the European strategy for the energy security?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tanaka-san, and thanks a lot for this invitation, allowing to continue the conversation of last year. And you are taking it indeed very much, and rightly so, under the geopolitical tensions and pressures which are increasing, where indeed energy security is a central consideration for energy policies in Japan, in Europe, across the world, for actors, but also governments. In Europe, this is a very important element of the political discussion. It was very visible also in the lead up to in the lead up of the institutional transition right now ongoing in Europe with the new European Commission, being prepared. Hearings in the European Parliament will take place in November. We now know the commissioners in charge. We have a Danish commissioner for energy. We have a Dutch commissioner designate for climate. They will both work, of course, under the supervision of the President of the Commission, but also of the Executive Vice President, Madame Ribeira, and the French Executive President, Stéphane Séjourné, and frankly, many others, because I think, and that's maybe the first element of reply, Tanaka-san, is that energy security is not about energy. It's a much broader discussion than just energy. It's about foreign economic policy, economic security. It's very much about all the sectors which are using energy, starting from housing to mobility, but also agriculture, and in fact all industrial sectors of our economy are immediately dependent on energy supplies and the energy mix provided under that supply. And it's, of course, a central social policy dimension. And Helle rightly said that energy poverty is, of course, particularly acute in many country partners of Europe and Japan, in Africa, Latin America, sometimes in Asia. But it's a very central political discussion also in Europe. I mean, unfortunately, poverty exists in Europe very much as well, and energy poverty is a big part of that. But at the same time, security of supplies and energy policy is a central component of climate policy. And we have always, and I must say, I mean, of course, certainly timelines, nuances, instruments, Helle and myself would not agree on everything, but where we fully agree is that this is really an issue of timelines and of mix. The 2030 targets for Europe of 55% of reduction of CO2 are in law. And this is now in Europe about implementing all elements of sectorial legislation, cutting across all these sectors to get us to this minus 55%. And indeed, the emission trading system in Europe will continue to bite more and more to also push that transition. So we are not putting this into question at all, and this is a key dimension also of the security of supply discussion. I'll come back to it. And maybe more interestingly, the perception sometimes here in Japan is that this is a difficult discussion in Europe. That perception is fully true. It is a difficult discussion in Europe. But that for that reason, we are backtracking. But that is not true. It's quite the contrary. We are very much keeping on track for 2030, but we are, to an extent, allow me to put it in these words, doubling down with a 90% target by 2040, 90% which is a policy discussion for now. But in the guidelines of the new commission, the president is asking her team to work on updating the climate law to put 90% as the legal target for 2040, allowing, therefore, to also develop the accompanying legislation and create the certainty for industries to continue their key investments beyond the 2030 targets. This is not going to be an easy exercise, and it is now, of course, also connected to a broader discussion on Europe's competitiveness. I think many are commenting on the Draghi report, which is, frankly, a little bit of a wake-up call for many in Europe. I don't think a lot of the analysis is completely new, but the way this is now publicly promoted is very important. That yes, in Europe we are lagging behind on productivity. We are very much challenged in our legacy industries. And we absolutely need to invest much more in our capacity to act as a sovereign, including in defense. And in that context, energy policy, energy security, but in fact the energy transformation is very much recommended as a key path for our industrial future and also a key path for our competitiveness. And therefore we will continue, as we have done in the last 5 years, the way the narrative is interpreted or commented upon changes, but it hasn't in its component changed much. It is that security of supply is very much driving our energy transformation. Security of supply requires availability of fossil fuels at a large scale, and what we have seen indeed with the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine has been a dramatic shift of not so much the energy mix, even if in these 2 years you see a massive acceleration of investments and availability of renewable energies in Europe, and electricity in Europe is now more than 50% based on renewable energies, and the Russian aggression and the fact that Russian gas became, if not available, unreliable entirely, has really accelerated these efforts, and with a number of plans associated to it, including on permitting, on investments, and the new setup for the new Commission will certainly also increase the availability of instruments and the intensity of the attention and the available resources. We will accelerate the availability of renewable energies in Europe. And with that, we connect again to climate policy and to the phasing out of fossil fuels, which the world agreed last year in Dubai. This is not discussed much because the language remains aspirational, but it was nevertheless the first time that the phasing out of fossil fuels was agreed in the context of the Paris Agreement. And that, together with the tripling of renewables already mentioned by Helle, energy efficiency, a key component also, drives very much energy policies, security of supplies in the European context. I think I stop here because I don't want to cover all the ground in this initial remarks, but just to say that we have also, as part of the plans now for the cycle which opens up the next 5 years, Commissioner Designate Jørgensen on energy in his mission letter has indeed two interesting components. The first one is to come forward with an electrification action plan in Europe, including to ensure that hard-to-abate industries can fully benefit from electrification. It will not be a unique solution. You will need other energy sources as well, fossil to an extent, hydrogen, hopefully green hydrogen to a large extent as well, but that's a key component of his roadmap. And the other one is to work indeed on a roadmap to end Russian energy imports in this cycle. So before the end of the decade. So yes, this will put some pressure. We need to ensure that the pressure on prices is well managed, but we will certainly continue for geopolitical reasons, but also for security of supply reasons, to ensure that this unreliable partner is not part anymore of our energy mix as we move forward.
Thank you, Ambassador. You said that Russian pipeline gas is stopped, but you are saying that LNG from Russia is going to be stopped by 2030.
I mean, there's still some pipeline gas as well coming to Europe, with an ongoing discussion where Ukraine is indicating that it wants to put an end to the agreement which exists today on transit through Ukraine. So this would put, again, a massive constraint, if this is completed, on pipeline gas. But yes, the roadmap is all Russian energy imports.
Thank you very much. Really, it's a great challenge, but I think Europe is definitely be the winner by de-Russianization as well as decarbonization at the same time. Yeah, I wish you the good luck. Let's move to Sadamori-san. I think IEA is created for the energy security place in 1974 at the first oil shock. Now, Fatih Birol is saying this is a global energy shock. How IEA is prepared for this energy shock or energy security as an energy security place?
Well, as you rightly said, we were created immediately after the first oil shock back in 1974. This is the 50th anniversary for the IEA, and in the kind of about the half century of history of the IEA, our oil stock release actions were taken by 5 times, and fortunately or unfortunately, I happen to be in charge of the 4th and the 5th one. Both
I was in charge of the 3rd one.
You were in charge of the 3rd one, and I did the 4th and 5th. Both were the largest in history. So 63 million barrels in March of 2022, and then 120. In April of 2022. So just 2 years ago, we released the oil stock from the emergency reserves of the member countries. So yeah, this morning we were talking about the climate emergency, but I'm in charge of a different type of emergency. Now, so about this security and transitions. security of energy transitions, I would like to point out two aspects on this, the security of energy transitions. So first is that the need for the continued vigilance on the traditional oil and gas supply risk. And of course, the clean energy transition is happening, according to our executive director, happening much faster than many people anticipate. But at the same time, we are not at all on track to achieve the net zero pathway. Even though we may have the peak in fossil fuel consumption, oil and gas and coal, all before or around 2030. But we don't expect oil and gas consumption to go down steeply afterwards. And even when we look at coal, the global coal consumption recorded all-time high just last year, 2030, and we have not seen any significant decline in coal consumption yet. So, so the point is that we will continue to need oil and gas in decades to come. And this supply security needs to be ensured during the whole process of transition. And so as long as we need oil and gas, we need to ensure the secure supply, because otherwise the economy will be in trouble. So, and I can even add that this traditional oil and gas supply security may become even more difficult with the transition because of the uncertainty as to the future demand course of oil and gas. So there may be some financing, investment challenges because of this uncertainty and also the concerns over what is called the stranded assets. So actually, I was in Hiroshima on Sunday and Monday, and because there was the LNG-related big conference, the LNG producer conference, and also the GII GNL meeting, and this was one of the main themes discussed there. So how we can ensure the needed financing and investments and the continued role of natural gas in the energy systems, of course, in the context of the energy transitions. So this continued need for the traditional oil and gas supply security is one element of the security of energy transitions. And the other element, second pillar, is the preparedness for the new types of risks and threats. Typically, we are seeing that we need to pay more attention to the electricity security with the higher penetration of renewable sources. So we need more flexibility and capacity. So we need better, improved market designs for achieving the integration of those variable sources. And also, we will need to be prepared against the more of the kind of a climate resilience, extreme weather events, which are happening at a larger scale, cyber security threats, and also the robust and the resilient supply chains for the clean energy technology sources, including critical minerals, critical raw materials. So in this last element of clean energy supply chains, I think that it is interesting to see the kind of the mercantilistic industrial policy approach coming back, appearing in particular in the advanced economies. So the one thing is that typically the US IRA, so that was a massive kind of subsidies and tax credits and domestic the content requirements which was successful, at least, to increase the domestic investments in the US on various clean energy technologies. But as Ambassador referred to, there was this Draghi report, which they points out the need for the kind of industrial policy approach and increased competitiveness for the kind of European manufacturing sectors. So I think that this is something, and this is of course happening in the context of a massive kind of a build out of clean energy manufacturing base in China, EVs, batteries, solar PVs, and all those, and also the massive, the very strong geopolitical concentration of the critical mineral supply chains in China. So all in all, I think that we are entering into the lot more complex systems and how we can maintain the energy security both in traditional and also the new context is what we need to work on in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasabori-san. I think you mentioned about lots of new elements or development in the IEA since I left, and that's a really good development for preparing for the very complex and diverse energy security issues. Congratulations for the preparation. By the way, for this transition, especially Japan is concerned about the supply of liquefied natural gas. LNG is very important, and maybe for the sake of transition for Asian countries, LNG's importance is almost very, very clear. But certainly, as you say, there are uncertainties about the future by this climate change mitigation. So investment may not happen as expected or as necessary, the IEA considered. How can you make the investment in the LNG happens to match the necessary demand, even though the uncertainty or ESG investment that the bankers are not inclined to do, or off-takers are not really eager to receive to do the long-term contract. I mean, can you have a good solution for maintaining the investment in the natural gas field?
Well, that's a very difficult question, and that's the reason why kind of the governments and the industries are struggling to find a solution. The one obvious factor is the need for the kind of a better the market outlook and the transparency, so that we can work on the kind of a common kind of the assumption. And I think that it's our responsibility to show the kind of the various possible scenarios, sensitivity cases for the natural gas demand outlook, and that's exactly what we are going to do in the work stream of the World Energy Outlook, and also maybe more focus on the natural gas area. And also the other element of natural gas supply security is the reserve systems. So responding to the Russian gas supply, the decline, European Union introduced the storage regulations to ensure all member countries need to be prepared to fill the natural gas reserves to a certain level before the winter season starts. So that's the other effort to ensure. So we think that the storage reserve systems, and also Japan introduced the strategic buffer LNG system. So there are many efforts like that. So I think that we would like to work on further studies in these areas to contribute to the global discussions.
Thank you. Yeah. Hell, yes, that's exactly. I tried to ask you the question.
Yeah, I wanted to. I agree with everything Sadamori-san said. I just want to maybe highlight two other things. Which were also discussed in Hiroshima. But there is a concern, of course, that LNG is about gas and gas is about methane. So we are very much in favor of another initiative from the COP, which is the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter, bringing together national oil companies and private oil companies around cleaning up our business, if I may say it as bluntly. And as part of cleaning up the operations in oil and gas around the world, there is certainly better management of methane emissions. And under the leadership of Japan and JOCMEC, it was also discussed in Hiroshima, as I just said, and we fully support that. And we think it's extremely important to, I would say, show that LNG can be clean and that LNG doesn't mean massive methane emissions. And it's all along the value chain from the extraction be it in the US, in Qatar, Australia, or elsewhere, all the way through transport and regasification to the end users and the gas networks in the destination countries. And of course, another aspect of the same topic is to build better plants, LNG plants. We sanctioned this year a project in Oman, which is an entirely electrified LNG plant. So no risk of gas leaks in the process because there is no gas in the process. And it's a green electricity that will be provided to the plant, and it comes from a solar farm that we are going to build next to the LNG plant. So we are combining solar and LNG, and therefore
you said it's Oman?
It's in Oman, yes. So my point is just there is also a lot to be done on the industrial side of LNG, of course.
Very good. Thank you for reminding me of this very interesting alliance of the oil major companies as well as this methane reduction initiative. I think in Hiroshima there's a discussion between KOGAS and JERA, the Japan-Korea collaboration on the methane reduction. And that is a really good example which I promote, the cooperation between Japan and Korea. By the way, innovation for Cool Earth Forum, this is ICEF. So I really want to touch upon the necessity of the innovation. So what kind of innovation you are introducing? I mean, you have already mentioned many things, but Hel, what kind of innovation are you proud of in the Total Energies for the sake of this transition?
So now I think I need the whole afternoon. Do you mind? Now, maybe I'll mention 2 or 3 things. We bought a battery company in 2016. And that battery company was not at all involved in storage of electrons in power grids. But we have used this company as a base to become a player in electricity storage for power grids. And I just want to remind everybody in the room that we do have a lot of renewables, and we as a company invest a lot in solar and wind. But the sad truth is also there's a lot of this clean electricity that is being wasted because the power networks can simply not take it on because they were not built that way, and the transmission networks are not okay. So today we waste an enormous amount of clean electricity. Either because we stop the solar and wind farms, or it's just wasted, curtailed. And so if we could improve quickly and be much better in electricity storage, we would have a first easy, low-hanging fruit win, which would just be not to lose this clean energy any longer. And I've been told that in Japan, on the nice sunny days, even Japan wastes up to 20% of its solar energy. So I'm proud of what we do in battery storage. And okay, we're not Chinese. Of course, the Chinese do a lot. But and the other example I want to give you, which linked to innovation, my firm belief is large companies also have to take risk. And we can play a role in scaling up new technology, even if maybe it won't work. And so let me share with you that we've sanctioned a floating offshore wind project that will participate in generating power for an oil and gas platform we have in the North Sea in Europe. So today it's only powered by gas. And before 2030, this platform will be powered by a mix of gas, as little as possible, and as much electricity as possible from a floating offshore wind mill in the North Sea. Will it work? I don't know. Is it worth trying? Yes, for sure. Because at the same time, we work also on floating offshore wind, which is another important technical innovation barrier. Just 2 examples.
Thank you. By the way, I talked with the Shell guy at the GasTech meeting in Houston. They are interested in a small modular reactor, nuclear reactor. Is Total interested in a small modular reactor?
No, we're not. So interested in terms of can it help the world and is it part of the solution set? Very possibly. But will we move into nuclear, be it large-scale or smaller-scale reactors? The answer is no. We have already a broad portfolio. We are the company investing the most in electrons amongst all the peers. So I think we have enough in our hands, and nuclear we're not going to do.
Thank you. Yeah, I try always Patrick Pouyanné to push Patrick Pouyanné to the nuclear, but not succeeded.
Nope.
Ambassador Paquet, what is the innovation in the European Union?
I'm going to need more than the afternoon here. So, but just to say that on small modular reactors, it's part of it. There is already in Europe today an alliance on small modular reactor research. Also, discussions take place with Japan. And the acceleration of the development and then deployment of this solution is also part of the mission letter of the Commissioner Designate for Energy. So it's an absolute key component of the low carbon or zero carbon energy transition in Europe. I think innovation is indeed absolutely critical. Innovation has indeed many facets, from research to industrial deployment. So it covers a very wide range. I would like to connect it to indeed dependencies. I think the main challenge, or one of the main challenges today in the energy and climate transitions everywhere, for Japan, for Europe, I think we need to team up, frankly, on finding solutions together, is indeed our dependency for critical raw materials and in key supply chains, particularly solar, but increasingly also a lot of pressure on supply chains on wind, offshore wind, and certainly a very strong place for Chinese operators on batteries. And there are many more examples. Here, innovation is absolutely critical. Innovation because we need to develop more resilient supply chains, maybe alternative supply chains. There's an ongoing discussion, I don't know how successful it will be, on solar. Obviously, the present solar technology, nobody will be able to compete. Maybe India will be able to compete, but certainly neither Japan or Europe are in a situation to directly compete. There might be niche markets, but direct competition will be very difficult. So I think this is about innovating and inventing new technologies. Perovskite is one example. To see whether it can effectively fully scale up. There's also a lot of research happening in Europe, and this is therefore, I think, one clear area where joining up forces between Japanese teams and European ones would make a lot of sense. We have successfully invested in Europe on catalyzers for hydrogen. We are leading on that. The challenge is, of course, to remain cutting edge and then to innovate in scaling up the deployment. So this is really an issue, again, of also industrial policy, but with a very strong track record. I'm also arguing nearly on a daily basis that we do more on materials. I think Japan is, of course, a leader in terms of advanced materials, but many of our supply chain dependencies are also about innovating for new materials or maybe using other materials in present technologies and supply chains. And on batteries, for example, storage particularly, there's very interesting work happening in Europe. Maybe Total is also involved on using sand, for example, as a key component for storage of electricity. So here a lot of innovation is taking place and needs to be really supported. I mean, the examples are endless also in artificial intelligence and grid management. We didn't discuss grids yet. I think this is the single most important obstacle to full electrification, much more than the supply of energy, frankly. Certainly here in Japan, certainly in Europe as well, and of course also in areas like East Asia. And often it is, I think, more the grid than anything else, which really hampers the take-up of a much more ambitious renewable energy deployment. So we also need to continue to invest in deployment, but also in critical innovations, including on cybersecurity of our grids. All this is taking place at scale in industries and through public research in Europe. And I would like to plead here for much more joint work between Japan and Europe, because most of that agenda is covered in Japan, including by the Clean Innovation Fund managed by NEDO, as part of METI policy and also research policies and research agencies, and as I just said, largely covered very ambitiously across many European instruments. So really here space for critical mass, both of solution development, but also of market creation. Both, I think, require genuine efforts on innovation. And I finish, because I don't think we come back to innovation, with the key role which indeed bottom-up innovation and startups and scale-ups play. In Europe, in fact, a majority of startups are really startups which are around clean solutions. be it energy, industries, materials, circular economy. This is where young Europeans, engineers, scientists are really putting their energy, their intelligence, and we are creating startups more sometimes than in the United States. So this is really happening every day in Europe. So solutions and ideas are all out there. And indeed, corporates are more and more looking into that as a valuable resource. This is happening also in Japan. And I think this is also one area where we should do more together than we are doing so far.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Ambassador. I cannot agree more about the necessity of collaboration between Europe and Japan. AI, we have discussed a lot in this ICEF, but certainly there are many areas. By the way, my question to you is that Europe is now trying to levy a new tariff to the Chinese electric vehicle importation to Europe. Is this innovative trade policy or innovation in trade policy?
This is not particularly innovative. Huh? This is unfortunately needed. The decision is now taken. Huh? The decision was taken a few days ago. It will now enter into force, which doesn't mean that we cannot continue to discuss with China. And that's an issue indeed of the scale and scope of public subsidies going in these industries in Japan, which deeply distort the market. And I think for Europeans, mobility is really the last frontier, really, in terms of decarbonization. That's one sector where progress has been slower, not just in Europe, but also in Europe. And the electrification of our mobility is a real key component. And we want to ensure that a major part of the products available to our consumers are European products. And with the massive subsidies happening in China, this is really putting it at risk and putting our industries under massive pressure. So I think these tariffs are WTO compatible, they are significant, and they were agreed now a few days ago.
Thank you for very good response, even very much embarrassing question from me. Sadamori-san, what is innovation in IEA?
We are all fields, all technology organization. So we think that all low carbon options, technological options need to be fully explored. So that's our basic position. But before commenting on that, I fully agree to the ambassador in terms of the importance of grid development. That's the reason why we produced a new grid report in October last year. And we were happy to see that the European Commission used that report that led to of course, that was the European Union's the initiative, but the European Union came up with this, the new grid action plan, immediately after the release of our report. So I think that there was a very good collaboration between the IEA and the European Commission on that. But I think that the grid, the crucial importance of grid in terms of securing electricity security, but also the kind of a better integration of variable renewables, is the crucially important. And also we need to see the electrification of various sectors. That's one of the major the method for promoting the decarbonization in various sectors. So electrification is a very important part. And in that context, we consider that nuclear is also a very important part for countries that choose to use them. And that's the reason why we are now working on the new report on financing nuclear, the energy. And of course, SMR is a very kind of a promising technology option. But in order for the SMR to be successful, there needs to be a very drastic reform of nuclear regulation in terms of international harmonization and the kind of applying common criteria. Otherwise, the SMR could end up being simple, the expensive nuclear power reactor. So I think that that's a very important part of the future initiative. But as I said, that the electrification is a very important part of the decarbonization strategy. But even when you look at the net zero emission scenario of the World Energy Outlook, the share of electricity in the final energy consumption is about half. So that means that the remaining half needs to come in some form of fuels. And that is, this fuel part is necessary to decarbonize what is called the hard-to-abate sectors, like the manufacturing industry and long-haul transport. So this fuel part is lagging behind. And so, for instance, in the area of renewables, of course, solar PV and wind, they're growing massively. But biofuels or the heat from kind of the natural resources, bioheats, that is far lagging behind in terms of what is needed. So in that respect, I think that it's not only the electrification, but other parts. And there needs to be a much more kind of a technological progress and the innovation in this area.
Sadamoto-san, I know that to decarbonize the energy sector, the importance of the critical minerals are getting more and more. That is what IEA has been saying. Are you thinking about the stockpile of critical minerals for the future?
So we have the IEA member countries they established what is called the Voluntary Critical Minerals Security Program. And in there, we aim to explore various ways of cooperation amongst the member countries to enhance the critical mineral supply security, diverse supply chains. So in some cases, in some elements, this kind of a stockpiling may be an answer. And there are actually a few member countries. It's actually Japan and Korea, for instance, have some programs of storage, stockpiling of critical minerals. But this is a lot more complex than oil. Because crude oil or oil, that's a global commodity. But on the other hand, the critical mineral is basically a kind of industrial inputs used by the manufacturing sector. So it's more about the kind of the industry's procurement strategy. And it depends on the shape of the manufacturing sector in the country. Some small countries do not have the substantial kind of manufacturing basis. So I think that the requirement by the member countries are quite diverse. So we are now trying to kind of find what kind of the cooperation, international cooperations, in particular amongst the member countries, could be effective and efficient.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no, on critical raw materials, this is, of course, a key component of economic security and of the digital transformation, the clean transformation, security of supply and energy across the board. And we have discovered the hard way what dependencies mean in Europe with the Russian war of aggression, which we have discussed. I think on critical raw materials, indeed, you need a broad strategy. And well, in Europe, we have adopted the Critical Raw Materials Act, as you probably know, which is largely also what Japan does, which is investing in your own capacities. And there is certainly space in Europe or in our neighborhood for mining and processing investments. It's taking place to an extent already to have at least some domestic controlled capacity. Then I think you also need to work differently with partners. And I think what has happened in the last decades is that we have either not been active or crowded out. And I think there is really space for a much better offer to partner countries on mining and on processing, so that the economic added value is not extracted, but also stays largely in the partner country. That's the way Japan looks at it, we as well. We do it in parallel. I hope we will at some point also do it occasionally jointly. And here JOGMEC is, of course, a particularly remarkable player, also one with, as was now just said, with interesting experience in stockpiling, which is a component of the reply, but yes, a rather targeted and focused component, not a critical or strategic component. Secondly, I think what is also happening in Japan, but much more in Europe at this stage, is recycling. And yes, this is now not so much a technological challenge, it's a market creation challenge. And here again, critical mass will be essential. And here also there are regulatory discussions between Japan and Europe where I think one should be hopeful that this will become a very significant source also of these critical raw materials. And then last, as I now said on innovation, for me, alternative advanced materials is undervalued as a key component and possibly a strategic one in replying to these dependencies. So a lot is happening and more should happen.
Thank you very much for addition. Hel.
I just, listening to my two fellow panelists, I was thinking of two other aspects, which is not linked to innovation, but without which innovation cannot be deployed. The first one is permitting, that Adam Morrison referred to for nuclear, but permitting, of course, is slowing down the deployment of renewables, and I think we're all aware of that, and then governments are working on it, but boy, is it tough when you have a project. And so a company like mine will always favor deploying in a country where it's 4 years rather than 8 or 12, right? So that's just when you have a choice. You go to the countries where there's a possibility of starting up the project quicker. So that's one thing, permitting across the board for new energies. And the second thing is simply labor and skilled labor. Because in the richer countries, and it's of course the case in Japan, but it's also the case in the US, and it's certainly the case in Europe, we are finding that in certain areas, we simply lack enough people. And if I was listening, and of course the importance of transmission and grids for the deployment of renewables, so fully agreed with what was said. But in the US, the speed of deployment of building these new grids is slowed down by the lack of people who are able to do it.
Thank you. We have 4 minutes to go. And the final question from me to the 3 panelists is that this morning session, Johan Rockström made a very strong argument about the planetary boundaries. Ambassador was not here, but you know Johan very well. So you know what he said, I can imagine. And he showed the kind of urgency, and the situation is like emergency, he said. And do you agree with his assessment? And also, my question to you is, if that's the case, what do you recommend Japan to do? Is there any good thing Japan should do now for preparing or responding to this planetary boundary issue? Let's start with Ambassador, and then Hera, and then Sadamori-san. Just 1 minute each.
Yes, I will try, and I will. I mean, what he said, I didn't listen to him, but I know what he says, I think is understated. Huh? It's far worse than what he said. And no one is acting on it. Not any one of you in the room, not anyone here on the panel is really fully acting on it. That's, I think, what we need to accept. Of course, it's very difficult to keep this in mind because this is so unsettling that we will leave this room and we will try to forget what he said. And we will be probably rather successful in forgetting what he said. And that's inevitable and really the real problem. But Johan's analysis is based on hard science and requires action. So how do you deal with that? I think you need to deal with that probably in part in the way the Europeans are doing it, which is to connect this discussion on planetary boundaries to social, economic, geopolitical policies, because that's what really drives public action, industry action, and sometimes also change in individual or societal behaviors. And this is why you need a legal framework, which is long-term, provides certainty, but also hard targets. And then you need to deploy a set of policies, which we've discussed now quite largely, in fact, from the point of view of economic deployment, economic security, dealing with supply challenges, which absolutely exist, but connect them to this planetary urgency. Yes, early on, Sadamori said very rightly, the economy will be in trouble without a proper supply of fossil fuels. That's for sure. But the economy will be much more in trouble from not dealing with this climate emergency. Just look at the cost of weather events. Look at the cost of climate adaptation. Look at the disruption in productivity across many societies already. This is not factored in by any of us. And this is, I think, the way Japan should look into that. And I think maybe look a little bit less at preserving our present industries. That goes for Europe as well. Huh? Of course, they are still critical for the decade, and I'm not putting an S purposefully to come, but look much more at the future investments and industry. I think that's the way to go.
Thank you. Hel.
Well, yeah, just for the sake of time, I think we heard it this morning, but Japan is going to, create either a carbon tax or an ETS mechanism in the coming years. So that is, I think, one positive way forward. And I would just emphasize education and creating awareness, because I think we are all citizens of this planet. And when we understand, and maybe need to be told many times, as Ambassador Paquet just said, but I think we all want to participate. And I heard this morning, we have the sovereignty of our own behaviors and consumption patterns. And so I think education is very important.
Thank you very much. Sadamori-san, the last word.
So 3 things. First, keep the aspiration high. Second, do whatever you can in clean energy transitions, but at the same time, be prepared for the uncertainty. In particular, transition is happening and will happen, but there's enormous uncertainty as to the speed of the transition. And even though clean energy investments are happening fast, but that's only happening in the advanced economies and China. And we need a lot more investments in the developing parts of the world, which is actually vital in terms of the future course of the energy mix and CO2 emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the 3 panelists for contributing the discussion and from the energy security part and transition. ICEF, we are always talking innovation, so we have to be positive, we have to be more optimistic, and you help me to be like that, and I really appreciate your participation. I wish the audience to join me thanking the 3 panelists. Thank you very much.